What I want to insist on is this: our entire lives, even when all evidence runs to the contrary, stand shot through with blessing. It's everywhere, and it's our job to speak it, to point it out, to put an arm around friends who can't see it right now and believe it on their behalf. With confidence, we say, whatever else may be true, and despite every competing voice, you belong to God.
Hello and welcome to a fresh episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast. My name is Phil Schiavone with the Coalition for Christian Outreach, the CCO, where we're transforming college students to transform the world through campus ministry. And with me, of course, is the host with the most to say about the books you should be reading from Hearts and Minds Bookstore, Byron Borger. How are you doing today, Byron?
I'm doing good today. We had, as we're recording this, a week of some really smoky weather here in the mid-Atlantic.
Yeah.
You and I together were still at a CCO staff training where our staff from all over the country came into Ohio. And then we had to drive back through the thick of it, driving by Pittsburgh on the turnpike. And it was bad. It was bad for you driving back too, probably, right?
It really was. Yeah. I was taking photos at the gas station that I stopped at and could not believe that I couldn't see past the street, across the street. It was like a dense fog or snow or something. It was really weird.
The book notes that I do every week or so listed some books on wildfires that I had been planning, kind of a faith desire to, be good stewards of the creation and understand how climate change is affecting fires are hotter and more uncontrolled. Things are drier, humidity is down. And so forest fires are just part of the climate change problem. And so I was doing a book notes on that I was going to put out later in the summer. And then we had this experience with these fires up north, and I thought, I got to post this thing right away. So I came home and wrote that thing. And it just went out as people are seeing this now. It would have been a week ago, but that was what my latest book notes was about. But it was inspired in part by driving back from Ohio. We had a good time out there at CCO. For people that are listening that don't know, the Coalition for Christian Outreach hires people that partner with churches to reach college students with a whole life vision of discipleship that's integrated into their experience in higher education. And they partner with churches near universities. We had people from California, from Florida, from Western Ohio, Eastern Ohio, Indianapolis, people all over. And of course, it started in Pittsburgh. Beth and I used to work for them before we started our store. So we still go back and sell books. Bill, you're an area director, a trainer and director and mentor for some of our field staff. And then I'm just the bookseller that shows up and sells books to everybody. But we had a good time out there in Ohio, didn't we?
We had a blast. It was just reaffirming for the mission of reaching college students with the gospel and with this good news of the kingdom that covers every square inch of the ground that we cover, right? Not just our souls and our spirituality, but the very work that we do and that college students most likely will end up doing, right? Not college students don't all flock to go do ministry and campus ministry. They're attorneys and scientists and math teachers and artists and musicians, and we want to equip them with how the gospel reaches them as well. And it's no surprise to me that, in this ilk of covering every square inch, that Hearts and Minds is even covering the wildfires and what that means for our faith doesn't surprise me one bit. And, if you're listening to this and you are not subscribed to Byron's book notes, there's a link in the show description for that as well. And of course, there's links to the CCO to find out more about us and what we do in campus ministry. And of course, if you have any interest in reaching college students in your neck of the woods, please do email me or hit us up on the contact link on the CCO website as well to get a hold of us and see how we can partner together.
Well, one of the things that Beth and I have always appreciated about the CCO, and this goes back to the 70s when we were students and then working for them in campus ministry for a while, is that the CCO tends to partner with local churches. There are some other boards and nonprofits and organizations, even within the college sometimes, that they partner with. But the main way they get people on campus is they partner with churches that are near the campus. So it's ecumenical, it's church-based, And so you raise your own salary. They're trained well, supervised well with professionals in campus ministry, chaplaincy work, but they actually represent the local church. And so there are some of the students that we reach at some of the fellowship groups at the various campuses may not even at first realize it's a CCO leader because they just think they're from the local church. And that's kind of cool. So what I thought I'd do today in honor of the CCO's unique way of doing campus ministry, unlike some other great parachurch groups that do campus ministry, CCO does it through the local church. And so I thought I would name 3 books. You could name 300, but I'd name 3 books on the local church. Does that sound like a good plan for CCO folks?
Let's hear it, Byron. Go right into it.
Well, and you know what? If you're a CCO person listening to this, I'm always surprised when we sell books at CCO staff training. So many books, so many categories. You have students that are going to be science majors or math majors or, artists or whatever, like Phil said. And you buy books to help feed those students with that stuff. And there's spiritual formation and prayer stuff and Bible study skills and all kind of things. But one of the categories that everybody always looks at is worship. And church stuff. We always have books there. So when I was out there last week in Ohio selling books, I was looking at some of the books in that church section, and I thought, oh, we should talk more about these because it's so important to the CCO's mission and important to God's work in the world. So here we go. The first one has an unusual title, and it is brand spanking new. It technically isn't coming out till next month. We got it early from InterVarsity Press, written by a friend of ours in Western Pennsylvania. Strip Mine Jesus. Hope for the rural church, small towns, and overlooked places. I don't know about you, but I have relatives that did strip mining work, and I have good friends that have worked in mines, and my grandfather died of black lung. That wasn't as much strip mining, but the mining culture in Western Pennsylvania is strong, and that's where the CCO had its roots originally. Well, no matter where you're living, this is a book that is brand new about the small church in overlooked places, often in the middle of nowhere, often in places where big business have extracted the wealth. You think of the whole problem with the mining industry in Appalachia, particularly, where there's been this extractive mentality where rich people have taken the goods and gone and left devastation often in their wake. Those kind of disadvantaged places are places where there are churches. And often those kind of churches aren't featured at conferences and on the cover of Christianity Today and on magazines in the Christian Century. You hear about the big successful churches often, or you hear about churches with a good niche, working with immigrants or whatever. What about just ordinary churches in small towns or disadvantaged towns? Strip Mine Jesus by Charlie Cotherman is this brand new book that says Jesus has not given up on the nobodies in the nowhere towns, in the small places that are often overlooked, in the non-dramatic places, and often they're small churches, and small churches can be really strong and healthy. We have a whole section in our store on small churches. And by the way, parenthetically, we do a conference out in Western Pennsylvania every October called Wee-Kirk. Wee-Kirk is Scottish for small church. And you have to have a small church to go there. And it's lay people, ordinary people, and pastors. It happens to be Presbyterian, but anybody's invited to gather to reflect on the joys and struggles of uniquely small congregations. I think they call small anything under 100, but lots of people have 25 people. And you go to an ordinary church growth conference or something, and they say, okay, here's how you have a better choir or a big praise band, or here's how you have a big youth group. Well, you may only have 2 kids in your youth group, and you may only have 4 people in your choir if you're in a Wee-Kirk, if you're in a small church. So the Wee-Kirk Conference understands that. It's held at a Mennonite church camp, and you can hit me up for more information if you're interested in the Wee-Kirk Conference, and we sell books there every year. This is a book we're going to feature this year at Wee-Kirk. Strip Mine Jesus, Hope for the Rural Church. Here's the thing about Charlie Cotherman. He's a fascinating guy. Let me tell you this. Charlie's first book was a study of what we call the Christian study movement, the Christian Studies Centers movement. In major research universities, almost all over from UC Berkeley to, Charlottesville at UVA to Cornell, to Upper House in University of Wisconsin. At major research universities, Christians have gathered almost like the CCO does, campus ministry style, but they form study centers where they bring in scholars that can dialogue with the professors, that can think Christianly about academic topics, and provide students to work collaboratively in these communities that call themselves study centers. Some of the study center movement was started in the 70s by some folks that also went on to found Regent College in British Columbia, a guy named James Houston. And also came out of the vision of Francis Schaeffer, to be honest, the L'Abri movement in Europe in the 60s and 70s. So between the holistic vision of kingdom thinking that emerged from Schaeffer and James Houston, they started these study centers. Well, that's a talk for a different day, but Charlie Cotherman, really brainy guy, studies that movement and wrote the definitive history of that about developing the Christian mind at research universities. One could almost hardly think of a completely different thing he's doing now, going from fairly highbrow elite thinking at universities in the Christian Study Center movement to now running a think tank in Grove City, Pennsylvania, which is a rural area. He's a pastor in Oil City, Pennsylvania, of a vineyard church. He's a part-time pastor, and he runs this think tank, this ministry to study and to equip small town churches. Rural life, small town life, and necessarily small churches are his bailiwick now, and he studies this. He's on a Brookings Center funded think tank group studying small towns too. So he's all about both small churches and disadvantaged communities. And there are lots of books on small churches, and there are books about disadvantaged communities. And he brings this together in a way that I do not think any other book has done. I haven't read it yet because it just came, but I am convinced Charlie, because I know him well, is a great writer, a great thinker, and he's doing workshops and study on his years out there at Grove City in this think tank studying small towns, that he realizes that Jesus has not given up on the out of the way places where people are hurting and the churches that serve those out of the way places. There are unique and distinctive challenges to the small town and rural spaces. There's something good, though, about stability. In the suburbs, people come and go. People are starting their families and they church drop and look for another place. And then they move, they get a job promotion, they go somewhere else. Often you don't find that in the more rural small towns or the agricultural based communities where people are leaving and moving and church shopping so much. And so the beauty of community, he has a chapter on that. The beauty of community in small towns is really quintessential. And small towns at their best. He looks at the goodness of stability. He looks at the truth of who we are, that our identity as a small church has got to be rooted in Jesus Christ and not in other ideologies that oftentimes more political centers in big cities. Often you have your ideological debates and you find your center in your political party or something. Here you find your identity in the church. So it's a beautiful, brand new book, Strip Mine Jesus, Hope for the Rural Church, about small towns and small churches in those disadvantaged stuff. Phil, did you grow up in a small town?
I
Kind of.
did. I did for sure. So I I grew up in Palmyra, Pennsylvania, which is right next to the sweetest place on earth, Hershey, Pennsylvania. And graduating class of 200, which like is medium size. That's not small. I definitely know classes that
Right.
were smaller, but definitely
Yeah.
grew up in a small town. I was born into a tiny little Lutheran church in the shadow of Hershey Park. Like literally, like could see the roller
How
coasters
about
from
that?
there, and then moved to a big church. I won't name the name actually, just for this conversation. But I experienced both early on in life, like kind of
Yeah.
small
Yeah.
church and then big church. And recently, I don't have my research with me, but I did a word study on the word crowds in the Gospels and in the Book of Acts. And only once, if I remember right, only once were the crowds referred to in a positive light. Everywhere else was negative or neutral.
Wow.
And I remember that having a profound impact on me, having been born in a small town and now currently living in a small town and pursuing the kingdom here in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania, and realizing man, there's a lot to be said, for
Yeah.
doing kingdom work in a small community where you know everybody, but there's still needs, and the needs
Yep.
that Jesus and the book of Acts and Paul's letters all address, they're all here in Shippensburg. They're all there in Palmyra, right? Like all of those
Yep.
needs that
Yep.
the kingdom covers are there. And so it re-inspired me for what me and my community are trying to do here for the gospel in Shippensburg.
Yep. Yep. And there is sociologically a difference. Like you say, it's all there in Ship and it's all there in Palmyra. You're pretty much right. But there are distinctively rural places, like way out where
Oh,
they're
sure.
surrounded by cornfields.
Yeah.
And there are Rust Belt towns as well that were once industrial and now are kind of ruined. I mean, there's places that are recovering, like Akron, Ohio, or something, Rust Belt city, where people like to do things and work hard, and they're kind of rebuilding their city from the inside out. I mean, so the endless cornfields or the abandoned mines. You think of Center County here in Pennsylvania, some of
Yeah.
the rural counties. Um, we have a campus ministry guy with the CCO up in Titusville, the south of Erie. Um, they got like less than 100 people in their college. It's a branch campus of Penn State that they've not closed, or maybe it's a branch campus of Pitt. Branch campus of Pitt that they haven't closed, and they partnered with businesses, and it's like a training hub for vocational learning. But he
Yeah.
still has a job doing part-time campus ministry in this college that only has 100 people. You can imagine how many people are in the high school if the college is still open and only has 100 students. So there are these kind of job questions, there's ecological questions, there's sociological questions, and there's health questions. How do you even stay a healthy marriage or something when there's not that many people around your age? So Charlie looks at some of the strengths and weaknesses of small town ministry and casts a vision for doing ministry, not just in the high profile cities or in the really exciting church growth venues of the suburbs, but actually digging into small places, Wee-Kirk, as we call them, and looks at the beautifulness of a faithful presence in that very place. I think this is going to be a fantastic read, Strip Mine Jesus, and I'm excited to be the first place to tell you about it because it's technically not even out yet.
Amazing.
Did your parents grow up going to church, Phil?
Yes, my
When
mom
they
was
were
definitely
little, when they were little?
yeah, they were definitely more involved, and my mom grew up on a farm that is now like Hershey Med Center grounds, if I remember
Wow,
right, things
wow,
like that, and grew up in that small Lutheran church. My
yeah.
dad's faith was Catholic growing
Sure.
up, and he did not have the best personal experience with that, but was still faithful to going to church with us when I was young.
In a,
So
sm- in a small church, probably where he grew up.
yeah,
My
he
parents both
joined
grew
right
up
in with the Lutheran church there. So
yeah. My parents grew up in Center County, where there were
oh yeah,
trout streams and rural stuff. Penn State was a big deal, but they were sort of an hour out of that almost. In little towns. My uncle was the mayor of a small little town. My
sure.
grandparents were both fishermen people, fly fishermen in Center County. But they're little churches out in the middle of nowhere. We've driven by them, and I found places where my mom went to church when she was little. So it was more common to have small churches in rural spaces. You think of the United Methodists who had circuit riders back in the day, and they would
That's right.
go by horseback from parish
Yep.
to parish to parish. So yeah, there's something to all that. It's kind of interesting. Um, the second book I'm going to talk about is somewhat related, although it's a very different kind of book. Strip Mine Jesus by Charlie Cotherman is a good read. It's thoughtful, but it's not academic. This next one is a little more academic, and this guy is known for hard-hitting philosophical scholarship. And I didn't know he was going to do more books like this, but his name is Andrew Root. I think Root might be Presbyterian, but he teaches at Luther Seminary, which is up in the Twin Cities. And he has written a string of books, maybe 6 or 7, about different topics about pastoring or congregational life or youth ministry or evangelism in the secular age. And his books look at stuff like Charles Taylor, the philosopher who looks at the secularization and the secular age in which we live. And by engaging the philosophical assumptions of Taylor, he would look at how do you do church in a world like this. He has one on evangelism. He has one on spirituality in an age when spirituality is chosen rather haphazardly, and you may end up in a yoga class or a new age thing, and who knows what kind of spiritual journey we use, and how do you talk about Orthodox Christian spirituality and being formed in the ways from the inside out in Jesus, when spirituality means so many things to so many people in this odd secular age with this interest in spirituality. It's one of Taylor's points, is that a secular age doesn't even mean that you're seemingly secular, because there's a lot of weird spirituality in the secular age. So Andrew Root has made a cottage industry of doing like 300-page books that are really dense, each using a sociologist or a social theorist or a critical theorist or a philosopher like Taylor to help us understand the context of thinking theologically about the church. His brand new one is called Baal, B-A-A-L, one of the great idols of the Old Testament, Baal and the Gods of More. The subtitle is Rescuing Church Growth from Idolatry. Just a word about this new book and its subtitle. Rescuing church growth from idolatry implies that some church growth thinking, some of our aspirations about how you grow a church, the metrics in which you measure a healthy church, some of that church growth ideology is idolatrous. I think most of us have known that for decades, that counting numbers and how many seats in the pew and how much money is given on a given tithe, any given offering plate Sunday, is a bad metric for the health of a church. Whether it's Eugene Peterson or others over the years, we've deconstructed that false ideology of growth and bigger and better, and church planting and giant campuses may or may not be healthy. And so he says we need to rescue church growth from idolatry, which implies that church growth itself may not be a bad thing. So that's one thing right off the bat. There are some books that say church growth itself is an idol. Anytime you go searching for bigger and better numbers, Great Commission be damned. We don't want more numbers. We like small churches. That's the faithful way, small churches, and we don't want to go out of our way to grow. We don't want strategies. If God gives us the joy of growing, that's God's prerogative. But we don't want to manufacture or create any kind of techniques to grow. There are some real skeptical people of any language of growth whatsoever. He, in this book, is saying that church growth could be a normative thing. We just have to rescue it and revive it and renew it, reforming it from the possible idols. And the idol, he says, with Baal in the title, is the idol of more. That more money, more numbers, more bigger, more people is necessarily a good thing. So this is a huge topic that many have written about over the years, that endless pursuit of more will not save the church, and the church, to understand what a healthy church needs to be, has got to find its answers in Christ-like renewal and not just a technique to grow. And in this moment of church decline, in the secular age we live in, fewer and fewer people are going to church. We can't gin up new techniques to save the day with new technologies or media campaigns or hybrid churches of online stuff with hip music just to get more people in the pews. It's not going to work. And he tells you here why. He gives a stinging rebuke to the Western gods of growth. It's interesting, Phil. He's tying in here to other ideologies in the culture at large. It's in the air we breathe that bigger is better. When we measure metrics of economics for businesses, if a business has a moderate profit and is pretty much stable, that's not considered a success. I mean, literally, investors won't invest in anybody that only gives a moderate profit of stability. What people want is growth. And if you're on a growth trajectory and things are getting bigger and better, then that's considered success. And the church has adopted that materialistic bigger is better model. And instead of saying small is beautiful, we say bigger is beautiful. And so he's critiquing sort of economics and the way that commitment to growth is in our mind, in our culture, and then says, how have we adopted that idol of growth, and bigger is better and more is better? And how can we root that out in the church and do better by measuring the right things instead of the crass matter of growth and numbers? So that's not a new topic, but to have Andrew Root address it and link it to idolatry is as blunt as any book I think I've seen on this topic in the last 25 years. So yeah, I'm excited about this.
Yeah, and I think that will be a helpful book for anyone that has taken absolutely any step forward in helping your church grow. Right? Like we need something to ground us. So even if you've just, you've been helping out in the kids department, or you helped out with an outreach event, or you've stepped foot in like a council meeting or whatever, like uh, all of these places have been impacted in some way by some sort of church growth strategy at
Yep,
some point in the
yep,
last 40 years. Like you just need to know
yep,
that going into
yep,
any sense of church growth, church leadership. And so to have a grounding,
yep,
right, that points out
yep,
that this is good, but it's captive by idols has to be just so
yep,
helpful for
yep,
anybody. Again,
yep.
anybody that has even touched a sense of helping your church grow. It just sounds really helpful and a really good resource.
And one of the little sidebars too is when you're committed to that kind of growth, you need to fine tune it to make it work better. And so you need efficiency. And so now you've adopted other kind of technological
Mm,
efficient norms. And so everything has to serve this one technique of efficient numbers and money well spent, not just to be good stewards, but to get more bang for the buck. And so you end up thinking about everything in light of and through the lens of this growth model, and that becomes endlessly exhausting.
yes.
And so he talks about rest. We can't even do Sabbath right because we can't rest because we're
Wow.
so endlessly exhausted by all the stuff we got to do to make this machine work. I know
Mm,
there's pastors out there that have said that exact sort of stuff to me, and you feel it
mm,
in your bones. This book will give you the philosophical and theological basis to say that. Here's another thing you should just know. Probably 15 years ago, maybe 20 years ago, Andrew Root became famous by teaching youth ministry, and he got this job at Luther Seminary, and he began to teach particularly mainline churches, although he's rooted in evangelical faith. He taught mainline churches how to do youth ministry better. And in those years, one of the shifts in youth ministry was to what the youth ministry folks would call relational ministry. That we don't
sure.
want to model in a machine and a big program. What we just need is to care for kids. And he wrote a critique of that, saying all too often what passes for relational ministry is basically using kids to get what you want done so you can have a successful youth program. In other words, it's a strategy and not authentic. And he
Mm,
says, you got to really love in Christ like ways the kids in your youth group, including the weird ones and the dumb ones and the outcast ones. You can't just go after the rock stars the way some ministries do and get the really cool athletes because they'll attract other successful kids. You got to go over the lost and the least. And as you show authentic care for kids, let the chips fall where they
sure.
may.
Sure.
Um,
Great.
and so he wrote this book on relational ministry that says relational ministry itself was captive to this notion of growth and efficient programming, and you weren't really loving the kids, you were just using them.
Mm,
I thought that was a radical book, and you hear shades of that here, that well intended programming often is seen behind the scenes as a strategy and not as a real authentic tool of ministry. So anyway, I think this is a tour de force, one reviewer called it. It's a major critique of the lousy theology and the thoughtlessness behind a lot of our church growth stuff.
yeah,
The church has become like a machine, and he says
sure.
we've got to stop this thing. One chapter is called "What's So Bad About Growth Anyway?" And he tells you. So there you go. Baal and the Gods of War by none other than Andrew Root. We carry all of his books, and this is the new one on Baker Academic, and we're excited to talk about that one. Now, there's one more I'm going to tell you about, and this is by one of my heroes and a lovely, lovely pastor. Now, I think an Episcopal or Anglican priest, even, I believe, and his name is Winn Collier. Winn wrote a couple of youth ministry books, in fact. He wrote some books on contemplative spirituality early in his career. He began a project of writing what became the seminal, wonderful, only really good book about Eugene Peterson, his mentor and friend. It's called Fire in My Bones, and it's a biography of Eugene Peterson. And Winn spent years of his life going through Eugene and his wife Jan's papers and stuff. even found papers that Eugene had written to me. And he wrote this wonderful biography of Eugene Peterson. At that point, Collier was pastoring a church in Virginia, independent church, and he got the job at Western Seminary, which is in Holland, Michigan, run by the Reformed Church in America, the RCA Seminary in Holland, Michigan, called Western. And he got a job there to start the Eugene Peterson Center for the Christian Imagination. It became a writing program where you can get a master's degree in theological creative writing, in Christian theological writing. And some wonderful memoirs and stories have come out of that program now that it's running. They do a conference called Doxology every year that's glorious. Music and art and prayer and solitude and good food and great lectures. The Doxology Conference in the fall up at Holland, Michigan at Western Seminary. So that's what Winn does for a living. I like to give people the backstory of who it is I'm talking about to see if his story might resonate with you. But even if his story doesn't resonate with you, this book is amazing. Here's the book. Came out a couple of years back, and Eugene Peterson himself said it's a tour de force, an angle on understanding the life of both congregations and pastors that exceeds anything I have ever read. That's quite a quote. The best book on churches or pastors I've ever read from Eugene Peterson. And it is a novel. It is called Love Big, Be Well, Letters to a Small Town Church. This book is comprised of fake letters. It's a novel, letters that Winn cooked up, although it comes right from his heart. So believe me, Winn cooked up these letters, put them together as a novel, almost like that famous novel now in the bestseller list, The Correspondent. A plot can really develop if you read the letters carefully, and they're well written in such a way that they talk about a person, then they answer back, and then you find more about that person, and then they share something else about that person's cousin, and pretty soon you're in a plot, and you realize there's a whole novel going on here, but the novel is written as a series of letters. In this story, a very small town church was struggling because their pastor had left, and they didn't have a lot of great spiffy stuff in the town, one cafe or something and a gas station. And they didn't have a lot of budget and stuff going on in their church to grow and do all kind of great stuff. So it's almost like the first two books. They weren't interested in the ideology of growth at all costs, and they were a small town strip mine kind of place. And they put an ad for looking for a new pastor, and a cranky old retired guy reads this letter. And he says, I think I could be that church's pastor. And he writes to them and said, we're not going to have any nonsense. We're not going to have any programs. We're just going to learn to love people like the early church did. I'll preach to you once a week, and we can learn to love each other. And that's going to be about it. If you want that, I'll come and do it with you. And they said, well, it's the best we can do. We'll take you. And so the beginning of the letters, the very first one is this signing up for the new pastorate. And then theoretically, these are the letters he wrote to his church once a month for the first year of his ministry. And you start learning all the stuff that goes on in this small town church and what the pastor is going through and what the congregation's going through. It is a novel, and you learn so much about the spirituality of a good congregation, a small congregation, granted, and what a pastor needs to be doing and going through. Winn Collier wrote this novel, Love Big, Be Well. Listen to what Seth Haynes, he's a great writer himself, Seth Haynes said about this. He said, there are some stories so well written, so layered with meaning, so humble and true, that they should be read, reread, and read again. Winn Collier has written that kind of story. The honesty in these pages would work a sort of sobriety into us, pastors and parishioners alike, if we'd let it. It can work a sobriety in us. We're not going to get drunk on all the stuff of the world. We're not going to get all distracted by the growth and the other stuff. We're going to focus on what really matters. And what really matters is Jesus and loving each other. Collier writes, strong and true, Robert Benson says. Happy and sad, funny and wise, heavy and light. I never fail to read anything that he writes. If you were a lover of words and wisdom on the printed page, you should read him too. And this book is a fine place to start. That's Robert Benson on Winn Collier. This is a great little story about pastoral ministry, about the local church. It's not sexy and wild. It's not crazy and fabulous. It's just an ordinary church in an ordinary town with a kind of cranky pastor who writes these wonderful letters, and it unfolds like a novel. So if you want a beach read, you're thinking maybe you'd like to read these other two books, but the summer doesn't quite grasp your attitude to read a heavy book like Andrew Root, or maybe you're not quite in a strip mine world, and so you don't think Charlie Cotherman's quite right for you. I'm telling you, at least read this. You'll enjoy it. It's a novel. It's short. It's breezy. You can read it and reread it, and it asks how we faithfully live the particular everyday lives of discipleship in an ordinary church in an ordinary town. You'll find it really enjoyable, and I like it a lot. Love Big, Be Well by Winn, Collier, and that's our third book from Hearts and Minds.
I love it. When I first became a student leader on campus, the student that asked me to be a student leader said, "Just be careful, it's lonely at the top." And I think what this sort of book does well, I've experienced 4 different pastors in 26 years or 21 years now of serving at the church I've served at. And it's so rare for the pastors to be known. Right? They're just kind of seen in their roles and the expectations, their job descriptions, their sermons. And what I love about what you're saying there about this book is like this kind of exchange of letters and the process of pastoring a church and pastoring a church well. And I think it would be good for congregants to gain a perspective of that as well through a book like this of, hey, we need to learn how to know our pastors, not just expect to just gain from them, which I'm hearing in the other 2 books that you're saying as well. This idea of gain is so like encultured in us that we need to like put a lens on it, a light on it, and say, stop trying to gain all the time. Stop trying to juice the orange of your pastor down to the rind without caring for him or her. So I really like that perspective that this book is bringing already to that.
You know, and he does reveal himself in the novel. The pastor does reveal stuff about himself in these letters he's writing. He does want to be known, although he's an outsider of the community, and he said, "We'll just give this a shot." But he's an old school parson. He's a pastor. He cares for people. Can I read just one little part? Do we have time to read one little part? This is one of the letters he's writing, and he says, "What I want to insist on," some of them feel like sermons, so it's very edifying to read the story. "What I want to insist on is this. Our entire lives, even when all evidence runs to the contrary, stand shot through with blessing. It's everywhere, and it's our job to speak it, to point it out, to put an arm around friends who can't see it right now and believe it on their behalf. With confidence, we say, whatever else may be true, and despite every competing voice, you belong to God. To insist on blessing in a world where we know such misery, such disruption and inequality and sadness, is not to plead ignorance or brush aside grief and injustice. We do not paint a smiley face on the funeral casket. No, to insist on blessing means we refuse to believe that anything or anyone is ruined. When we insist on blessing, we pronounce our belief that the God who called us good, who called the whole world good, will not remove his hand of kindness." So isn't that nice? He invites us to put our arm around people and believe for them what maybe they can't even believe for themselves, that they are blessed. That's a great thing to read this summer, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And that's a good note for us to conclude on as well. So Byron, thank you so much for walking us through these 3 books. And if you're listening here, thank you so much for listening in for the first time or hopefully for many times. And whether or not that's true of you, we would love if you liked this video and subscribed and followed and shared so we can get these resources out to all of the people that need to hear about these books and others. If you are interested in ordering these books, just a reminder that there is 20% off all of the books that have been mentioned here in this episode. And the first link that you'll see in the show description is a link to order these books. So please click on that and order these books and any other books that you might be interested in through Byron and through Hearts and Minds. And there'll be other links that I'll throw in the show notes there as well to things that were connected here. I'll try and get a link to the Wee-Kirk and to the study center. we love supporting these ministries as well. So feel free to check out their websites as well. And of course, thank you for listening. We want you to read these books. Feel free to let us know what you thought of this episode or the books by contacting Byron or myself on the email addresses included as well. So on behalf of Byron Borger and Hearts and Minds, as well as myself and the CCO, this has been another episode of the 3 Books from Hearts and Minds podcast.